Hey everyone, welcome to the world of the International Fab Talks. This is Andrea, the host of the International Fab Talks, and today we are connected with our celebrity guest. She's none other than Jaswinder Challi, joining us all the way from UK. She's an author, an established author, a teacher, and a therapist as well. She's making us understand life through her experiences, what she experienced, and what we can learn from her wonderful book. And the name of the book is going to be revealed by her. This is part 2. She's been sharing it in part 1 as well. And today we are going to focus on another important topic which is connected to her book. Hello, ma'am, and welcome to the session. Thank you so much for being here again.
Hello, thank you again. Thank you for inviting me. Hello to everybody. I'm so pleased to be back.
Thank you, dear. We are happy to have you again after the break. Thank you so much. So, dear friends, I don't take much of your time. I'd like to dive deep into the topic. We are going to discuss about parents. And when we talk about parents, many of us do not have the guts to become single parents. We endure with the abuse, we endure with the torture. But there are several strong men and women who have taken the leap of faith and have stood brave as a single parent and have given the best to their children. One such individual is none other than our celebrity guest. She is Jaswinder Challi. Let's get to know more about it from her book and from ma'am itself. Hello, ma'am. And now we'd like to ask you, what do you have to say about single parenting? You've mentioned that in a book. There's a whole chapter dedicated to single parenting. If you could just share the name of the book once again, the title of the book, and then share about single parenting. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Andrea. Right, so the title of the book is called The Lighthouse, A Soul's Journey in Illuminating Darkness. And that soul journey is about myself. However, those that read the book will find that the way it's written, they will be able to take lessons from it. So it's written with a view to empower the reader. And yes, there is a chapter in there called Single Parenthood, because I became a single parent from soon after the birth of my son. And as I mentioned in part 1, the marriage was crumbling. And I think looking back, the crumbling was happening from even before the pregnancy. And so and I thought that once maybe the baby arrived, things might change, but in fact they got worse. And so I ended up on my own as a single parent, and that wasn't an easy journey. As I said, I remember very clearly with my son in my arms, and like my heart was beating really, really fast when I decided to leave. I made that decision. And as I said in part 1, I had made that decision a few times before, but taking that first step was very hard because the guilt would come in. So, I find when I finally did make that decision, I remember, like trying to comfort my son as much as I could, because the first thing that a mother needs to do for her child is to create a shelter. Now, if we look at the Maslow's hierarchy, if we look at it from a psychological point of view, Maslow did this pyramid called the hierarchy of needs. It's quite similar to the, chakras that, as we know, because the first hierarchy he refers to is about warmth, it's about security, it's about comfort. And if we can't provide that for our children when they're growing up, and especially when they're babies, we're doing a great disservice to that very first tier of their development. So it's very, very important that the child feels that sense of warmth and safety and protection, even if it's just one parent. That will be enough because they received it. Okay, so that's very important that the child starts to feel that. Now, I'm not saying that my son would have felt it all the time, far from it, because when I was on my own with him, I had to kind of draw out inner resources, inner resilience that I didn't even know I had. All these unseen strengths, I had to draw them out of myself, and I had to motivate myself, like getting up in the morning, making sure he's fed, and then when he was older, taking him to school and going to work, etc. You have to motivate yourself, and there is no one there to come home to who you can offload to, because you're on your own. There is no one at home that you can vent to say, I had a bad day today, and you have to then suppress all that material, and you keep suppressing and you keep suppressing, because it's hard, because when you're there as a single parent, then you have to try and show the best version of yourself that you possibly can to your child in terms of the strength. Now, as time went on, I started to started to look deeper into things. I started a counseling course, and I started to learn patterns and behavior conditioning, etc., etc. And from that, I began to realize that for me, the most important thing with my son was to be authentic, because being authentic is about being real. And so when I started to work on some of my patterns, and that sense of being real was to let him see me the way I was. And during that period, I ended up with severe depression. And also because of the traumatic aspects that I endured, and the sense of hitting rock bottom with nobody around, I also went into a state of psychosis. I remember going to see my doctor, and they did refer me to a psychiatrist. But I stopped seeing the psychiatrist because the psychiatrist sat there with a notepad in his hand, just making notes. I think I went for about 3 sessions, and after the 3rd session, I thought to myself, what's the point of me going if, he's just going to sit there with a notepad and just make notes? And so after the 3rd session, I stopped going. And then I realized I had to kind of work on my own, even on that department of things. I had to work on my own. Luckily, the counseling course and that area was helping me, because I was reading books. And that is when I came across the book, of Viktor Frankl that I mentioned in part 1 as well. So going back to, and that is actually very important, what I'm sharing, because when the child is growing up, there is a thing called learned behavior, and the child sees what the parents are doing. And that's one of the reasons why I decided to leave, because I did not want my child growing up with the same patterns that we keep repeating generation after generation after generation. I decided that my son was not going to carry on being a patriarch, being abusive, being all those labels that are so rife in many of the Asian communities, and in other communities as well. But I've got to say Asian because that's the community I, was linked to at the time. So I didn't want my son to have the learnt behavior of all those things. And this is because the child, when they remember that for yourself, just ask yourselves, for example, as an adult now, you will remember things from your childhood. You will remember what your parents did and said. And that's very important when your child is growing up, in terms of what you're instilling in terms of their later memories, what they're going to remember. And I decided I did not want my son to be a grown-up person remembering his household, his parents being one of domestic abuse. I didn't want him to grow up and remember his mother and father, his mother being abused, his parents always at loggerheads with each other, and they just stay put because society says so. They just stay put because that's the way it's done. They just stay put because people are going to talk. So, I didn't want any of that, because I was going to be the person that was going to break all that and change it. And I had to start with my son. So that is kind of like the legacy I wanted to create for my son, to make it different, to break the patterns, to start afresh. And you know what? He has turned up to be a brilliant human being, a brilliant person. And he understands a lot of things, and he's very spiritual like me. So, I don't know whether he learned that from me, but I actually think he's far more spiritual than me. And I think that I learned a lot of spirituality from him, because when he came into my womb, that is when I started having my spiritual awakening. So he's a very old soul, and I think that he is the one that came, earlier on in part one, I talked about sacred contracts. So maybe, this was part of the sacred contract that I had with him, because that was him coming into my life was my spiritual awakening. It turned my life around. But I didn't understand it like I do now. Obviously, at that time, I was going through a lot of pain. And, as I mentioned in part one, I do recall being angry with God, saying, why did you give me a child? If my life was going to be like this, at least I could have ended it. But now I have to think of my son. And if I do anything to myself, then he's going to be on his own, and I'm creating more negative karma. And so because I didn't want that, I had to endure. So my son actually gave me the strength, because I had to endure the pain. And I started to feel a lot of strength from him. I started to get a lot of strength from him. And he became my reason to survive. He became my reason to live in those early days, when the pain was extremely intense. And every day I would remind myself, I have to make it for him. I have to get better for him. I have to be a good mother for him. And I have to do things where I'm not creating more karma between me and him. So I had to think along those lines, and it wasn't easy. Like I said, it brought out a lot of strength from within me. And all the way through, I was very protective of him, very protective. And even amongst the lack of support I had from people as such, it was, I had to be that dual flame in his life, the mother, the father, making decisions on my own. Fulfilling, and it wasn't easy, because my son was into football growing up, but I hate football. So he missed out on a lot of things. He missed out on, because I was struggling financially, so I couldn't buy him things in the way that he wanted. So in a way, I think he was going through his, dark night of the soul growing up, because he's so spiritual now. But it was tough being the mother and the father, making all those decisions on my own, for everything, going to his school for meetings on my own, not being able to discuss, with a partner, with anybody, about his progress, not being able to share his dreams, his aspirations, his goals. And he speaks about how isolated and lonely he felt with his passion about football. And it used to just go over my head because I just couldn't relate to football. But I did used to take him, to the club where he used to play and pick him up. And as a mother, that was the only way I knew how to support him on that side. With a lot of the other things as well, he had to fend for himself.
So, dear friends, we are connected with our celebrity guest. She is none other than Jaswinder Challi, an author, a teacher, and a therapist. And me, I'm the host of the International Fab Talks, connected with our guest. Let's get to know more about her journey. She was sharing her journey with regard to motherhood, how motherhood has transformed her, and how it has given her a calling for a higher purpose, to understand herself and to bloom like a lotus, and to help others as well, right? Had a small break. We took a small break and we are back after the break. Hello, ma'am, and welcome to the session again.
Hello. Yes, good to be back. So, as I was saying, it's hard to be the mother and father. It's almost like you have to be this dual flame in the child's life, and as I was saying that, it I'm sure that my son missed out on so many opportunities himself because he couldn't do things with, like, so-called dad. And his dad wasn't around in his life at all. So, did I want somebody else? Yes, because at the time I didn't understand things the way I do now. And I didn't understand what my journey was about at that time. I was just going through it. And as a young woman in my mid-20s, I was vulnerable. And there were a few times when, men wanted to approach me. And I did initially have I wouldn't say like, yes, I thought on my side it was going to be a relationship, but he lived quite far away and, he came to see me several times, but on his terms, not on mine. And I remember, it was a case of just wanting to come and see me. And I felt that my son wasn't really in the picture for that person. And so I put a stop to it because for me, if anybody was going to be in my life, my son was a part of it. I did fall into, another trap with somebody else after that, but I was just giving people a chance, because I was lonely, I was vulnerable, I was suffering. I needed support. I needed somebody to help me as well on that emotional level. So I met somebody else, and for a short while, I saw him and I began to see the same pattern that he was not interested to have my son as a part of, his life. And when I saw that, what was happening, I had made a decision to myself that I just was not going to have another relationship with anybody, full stop, until my son was older and until I met somebody that was going to give themselves fully to both of us as a family. And, that I'm talking about when all of that happened, I'm talking about in my 20s. I've spent a lifetime on my own since then. I had made the decision not to go into a relationship with anybody. I made the decision that I was going to, because I was working, I was studying, and that was time away from my son. And so I wasn't going to invest any more time into anybody else other than my son. And so when I was going to be at home, I wanted to make sure I was at home for my son and not another man who wasn't invested in us. And so it wasn't easy. It was very hard. because you have to be very, very strong to remind yourself that you're going to stay this way, and you're not going to let somebody else come and persuade you any other way. But the bond between me and my son was so strong that it made it easy. He was so devoted to me, and he was so caring growing up. And I was so devoted to him. I kind of like didn't want to be in a situation where I was creating more toxicity within him, within myself, within the partner. And like when I was counseling, when I finished my counseling course, I started counseling. I was very lucky. Maybe this was a gift from God, but I was very lucky that I landed straight away with this job counseling for a women's center, and it was funded by the government specifically for ethnic minority communities. So 80% of my clients were Asian women, and I began to hear stories from them about the women that had started to have broken marriages, broken relationships, and they had children. And they started to tell me stories about the difficulty they were having with their children, with their partner. The partner didn't want to know their children. The children were feeling frustrated, didn't want to know their partner. So these women were caught up in the middle. And I was thinking to myself, I'm so glad I had made that decision a long time ago, not to be in this situation. And because some of these women were losing both, because the partner was like, oh, you care more about the children, and the children were like, oh, you care more about him than us. So there was a lot of conflict in the household for a lot of women who were in these situations. And with some women, because it had gone on for some time, several years, and as the children were growing up, they would then leave home, didn't want to know the mother, and then eventually the mother found out that the partner was having affairs on the side as well anyway. So there were situations like that. And this is what I mean about the toxicity. It's all the negative stuff that goes on within the relationships and within the household, amongst all the people in that household unit. And I was very, very adamant that I did not want that, and I was not going to have it. I still don't have a relationship at the moment. My son is still at home with me, and we're still very dedicated to each other. He is with a partner now, and I'm supporting them in their relationship. And now I am thinking, yes, I'm ready now, to to want to attract somebody into my life. But again, it will only happen if that person is invested into us as a family unit. Otherwise, I've spent all these years, he's not going to be able to walk in, and and I can read the signs because I've been there and I've helped so many women. So I can read the signs very quickly. I'll know whether they're genuine or not in that way. So it's, yeah, it's very, very important. Mm.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for being kind enough to open up and share about your journey as a single mom. And this is a good example for other women who could be a single parent, men also. Like, your child is your priority. So,
Absolutely, child. Yeah.
yes, yes,
Yeah.
ma'am.
Can I finish with a
Yes,
poem?
please, please, please go ahead, ma'am.
And it's called The One Who Stayed, because I stayed with my son. I didn't abandon him in any way. And this is for every single parent who became the shelter, the sky, and the soil for their child or children. Because I know there are many women, but also men. I have also seen very men dedicated to their children when the women have left, So it's not just women, there are some men in this situation as well. I was not meant to do this alone, but I did. and I do, with hands that tremble and hold at the same time, with a voice that sings lullabies while whispering prayers I never learnt to say aloud. I became the morning and the night, the giver and the guide, the meal, the money, the miracle. I made a home inside the hollow of my own longing and still gave warmth. No one sees the way I stitch broken, those broken moments into something whole. How I smile with a mouth full of unshed grief. How I dance around silence so my child hears only love. How I carry the world and their world and sometimes forget my own name in the process. But this is also the truth. There is power in the quiet. There is grace in the gap. There is divinity in being the one who stays. I'm not a martyr and I'm not a victim, but I am a temple that was never meant to stand alone, but I did. And from my cracks grew flowers. From my weariness came wisdom. And from my solitude, a love that will echo into generations. So if I falter, let me fall into tenderness. If I rise, let it be with sacred rage and sacred softness. If I am seen, let it be not for my perfection, but for my presence. I am the one who stayed. And in staying, I became everything.
Yes, dear. That was really awesome. That was really, really nice. You know what I was like attracted to was almost all the lines were really, really good. In the cracks, flowers bloomed, right? I think there's a big takeaway over there. No matter what you face in life, do not give up. Like you can still bloom. There's hope.
Absolutely.
There are kind people around. You need to just meet the right kind of people.
Mm.
Be very, very strong. Excellent, ma'am. That's really, really interesting. So, dear friends, you have a clue here. No matter whichever gender you are, a male or a female, and you're a single parent, you could be strong and resilient like our guest, Jaswinder Challi, taking care of her child, a gift from the Almighty. Like really, a child in our arms is really a gift from the Almighty, right? It could be a biological
Absolutely.
child, it could be an
Absolutely.
adopted child, it could be even a pet. Even pet parents are blessed to have a
Yes.
pet in their lives, right? Yes, dear. Now, ma'am, we'll talk about finances if you're comfortable. I mean, have you mentioned about finances in your book? Because being a single mother or a single parent, you should have your finances in place.
Mm.
Because
Yes, I have a chapter. Yes, I have a chapter in the book called Poverty, actually. Not finances in that title, but poverty, because poverty comes on many levels, and finances is one of them. And finances have always been very low, always since like I was on my own. Prior to that, prior to getting married, I was working, I had money, and I was doing stuff that I wanted to do. But when I became a single parent, obviously just one person's income alone is not enough. um Initially, I got a job, a full-time job, but it was only time limited job, and it was like for 18 months, something like that, contract, 18-month contract. And I took that because part of that job, they were offering a place in a nursery for my son, which was like, wow, this is wonderful. And the nursery was run by a local church. So the nursery nurses there, the caregivers, were actually nuns. And it was a really nice kind of environment in the church that they had. So I used to drop my son off in the morning and pick him up after work later on. Now, when the 18-month contract came to an end, I then was out of a job and I had no money and I couldn't get a job and I was suffering. Now, let me tell you, and I might get emotional on this when I'm talking about it because it was very deep and intense and it was scary. I remember going through a time after that, losing that job. I can feel the tears coming now, but stay with me, stay with the process because this is part of it. There was hardly any money, and I used to buy the basics with the minimum that I was getting from the benefit allowance. It was a very small amount, and I was also caught up in a situation where I was paying from the marriage. My partner from the marriage, he had clocked up my credit cards very high. So I was also, out of the chunk of the small amount of benefits I was getting, I was having to pay, all these people, and that left me with no money. And I remember I would make my son, like something like beans on toast or porridge. And I would go hungry for the rest of the day because I had to save food for the next day. And it was hard. And a lot of the time I would cry. And that is when I was really angry with God at that time period. Sometimes what I would do was I would get a bag of lentils and I would just boil that and just add some spices to it and just eat that to give me some nourishment. In those days, I had lost a lot of weight. I was very skinny, and I just don't know how I got through. I really don't know how I got through, but somehow I did. Money was very tight for a very, very long time, but I was trying to better myself every moment of the day, every single day of the week. I was just trying to take, as I said, each step forward to keep going. And I do remember my mum did used to um, come sometimes secretly because my father had fallen out with me and he was like told my mum she wasn't allowed to come and see me, but she would sometimes come secretly and sometimes she brought food for me. But I didn't want my mum to be upset and I didn't want her to know the extent of what I was going through. But I think she could sense it and I think she could feel it because at times she did bring some food round. And one day she said to me, and this is why I felt that she knew more was going on than I had disclosed to her, because just as she was about to leave one day, she looked at me and she put her hand on my shoulder and she said to me, nothing will stay the same. Things change, days change. Nothing will stay the same. What's happening today, tomorrow might be a very different day. She said, see life in seasons. You're going through a winter season, a storm. But she said, look for when the spring comes. Sorry. That felt so deep for me. And I guarded those words that my mum gave me that day to keep me going. And I just allowed the process. And I knew that if I kept going, things would get better. And and they did, you see, later on, not massively, but once I qualified as a therapist, it began to open up opportunities. But that early period was so hard because my son was at home. He was young. I couldn't leave him with anybody, and it was a very, very hard time. I think for about a good 4 or 5 years of my life, I suffered financially and the severest of poverty. You know, in part one, I mentioned about being in the desert. That was my desert phase, without having anything, hardly anything. Um, you know, hardly having people around, hardly having money around. And it was so difficult. You see, money, I understand now that money also is like, it's a living energy, and it doesn't just come. Some people abuse it and then they suffer afterwards. So you have to treat the idea of money in a very sacred way, as well. And obviously this is something that I've come to learn now, but I didn't know in those days. But I do know that even then I knew something about the law of karma and money and stuff like that, because round about that period, the same time I'm talking about, there was a war that went on when Yugoslavia, the Yugoslavian war, um, and we had a lot of the refugees come to our country, and people were knocking on the doors, asking for money. Now, that week, I had, out of my benefit money, I only had £20 left for like that, the rest of that week, for food. And when this guy came round and knocked on the door and they were collecting money, and I had seen all the stuff on the TV, I had to make a decision in that moment. Now, I thought to myself, there is somebody worse off than me. I'm going to get my benefit again next week. Okay, it's not going to be a lot. I'm in debt, I'm in poverty, but I know that that's going to come. I had to make a decision in that moment, whether I was going to give a contribution to that guy from my £20 that I had for the whole week. And something inside of me was saying to me, yes, do it. Give them £5. So I gave the guy £5 from the £20 that I had. And I told somebody, I can't remember who, but they had a go at me, saying that you're already suffering and you gave somebody else £5 from your £20. So it was met with negativity, but I didn't look at it like that, because I thought to myself, the way I thought of that action was, I did a good deed, and I don't know when that's going to be returned to me or how, but one day it will. Because although £5 wasn't much, it's not like it's 5,000 or 5 million. It may have fed one mouth. And that is so important in terms of spiritual knowledge, and in terms of understanding spirituality. So I just wanted to share that, in terms of, even when it's so hard for you, we should not forget our heart being humanitarian. Yeah. Because, that taught me that even though that I was going through such a bad time, there was people still worse off than me. And in a way that humbled me, and it made me stronger to just keep going. And that's what I did. I just kept going. But you know what it is? What it is these days, the problem is people want this, they want that, they want this, they want everything. I didn't buy clothes for many, many years. I kept the same clothes for a very long time. I think for a whole decade, I didn't buy any clothes. And I think for a whole decade, we didn't go anywhere that required spending money. You know, it was a very minimal, basic survival. And we did it. You know, mother and son, we did it. We survived. And my son was so good, you know, because I remember I used to say to him sometimes, I'm so sorry that I can't give you toys like other children have. I'm so sorry that I haven't got the money to do all the things that you would like to do. And he would hold my hand and he would say, Mummy, it's okay. I got you. I got you. It's okay. You know, he would reassure me in that way because I see sometimes some kids, they're very spoiled and the reaction would be so different. But my son was like that because of the way I was with him, because of the way I was projecting to him certain things. So yeah, um, it wasn't easy. Finances, as I said, was very difficult at that time. But I had to learn to live with the basics and being without and and learning that hardship. Yeah.
Yes, dear. Thank you for opening up, ma'am. And I could see tears rolling down your cheek, and I know that you have some painful memories. Yes, dear. I mean, you will heal, ma'am. Definitely, you will heal. I mean, my dear friends, you could relate to what ma'am has shared. I mean, if you're a single parent, you will definitely face a lot of tough challenges. But the best part is, ma'am has risen like a phoenix. Yes, I love that. I mean, I love people rising up after a fall, or no matter what you face in life, you have one goal. I will rise up again. Let the whole
Yeah.
world laugh at me. Let the whole world be against me. I'm going to rise up like a phoenix. I'm going to rise up again and stand till my last breath. लड़ते लड़ते मर ही जाएंगे लेकिन बिना लड़के नहीं मरना मैं तो आई थिंक दिस इज द थिंग दैट वी नीड टू लर्न राइट मैम
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Ma'am, now, like, before we come to an end to this session, one question that's nagging in my mind, not only me, the various viewers and the audience would love to know, why did you walk out of the marriage? Was it an arranged marriage? Was it a love marriage? What made you take the, of course, the abuse was there. Now, what kind of abuse that you will share now? So the simple question is, why did you decide or choose to walk out, make that tough decision and walk out of the marriage with a child, young big child in your hand? And did you give the birth to the child before walking out or after? That's also a question that I need to ask. Yes, dear. If you're comfortable, please do share.
Okay. Right. So I was actually engaged to somebody else in India, somebody I hadn't seen. And there was lots of like girls who I went to school with that, you know, they were getting engaged to boys in India. But what was happening was some of these girls were getting caught in terms of the boys not coming over. And so one of my relatives suggested that, you know, I get married here in this country, and she knew somebody, etc., etc. So she introduced us, and at the time it seemed like, you know, it was a good match, and we agreed to it and went ahead. Now, what I found out after I got married, though, was a sense of betrayal because they told us that he was working with the father's business in the father's property business, which wasn't the case. And then the other thing I found out was that he was a womanizer, interested in lots of women. And so he was not committed to us. He was hardly ever at home. He was always out doing his whatever. Um, and it seemed like obviously my in-laws knew, obviously, you know, so what he was like. So they thought, you know, he's married and let's just move them to a house on their own, because my father-in-law was in the property business, so he had properties, so he put us in a different property. But that was a mistake because things got even worse. So my partner at the time, he was doing a lot of projecting, and it was not at home, and he was not going to work, so he wasn't bringing in money. And I tried to get jobs, and every time I got a job, he would make me leave, especially after I'd had the baby. So I left after I had the baby. Um, and that was what that was like the final straw, because he would make me leave, obviously, to stay at home with the baby. Um, and then the third job that I had got, it was in the evening, so it meant coming home late at night, like 1 o'clock in the morning. And then he was causing trouble again, like, you have to stay at home. But when I was staying at home, there was no money. He was using my money, using my credit cards. He wasn't working, and he was, like, feeding off my money. All the savings that I had gone from when I was working. Everything was used up. And then when he made me, he had caused this big argument, and I remember that he was just taking care of himself, going out whenever he wanted to go out. He would dress up in front of me, and go out. I felt I had never, ever felt so alone and so imprisoned. It was horrible. And I thought to myself, I feel like I'm dying. I feel like this is killing me. And then I thought to myself, well, if this is killing me, then I might as well leave and let whatever happens to me happen to me. And also, I thought to myself, as I said earlier, do I want my son growing up in these conditions? Do I want my son growing up in bickering, no money, arguments, this, that? And one day I made the decision, and I just left. The way I left actually was my father-in-law was gonna, because it was another town, he said he was going to go and visit my dad. And I said, can I come with you? Because it meant I had a lift. And I said, but I want to stay a bit longer. And so I just came with my father-in-law to my parents' house, and they thought I was just going to stay for a bit, but I decided I wasn't going to go back. I got a job. Initially, I stayed with my parents. I got a job, and initially, for the first, I would say for the first year, they did help me out. I was living with them. I was working. But then, like, they thought I was just doing that temporarily. They thought I was going to go back to my husband, and they were putting pressure on me to go back, but it's not something that I was going to do. So I left my parents' house, and that's when my father realized what was going on, and obviously he wasn't sitting very well with the elders, and so everybody cut me off and ostracized me. And that's when I was left to fend for myself. Yeah.
Yes, dear. Yes, dear. I understand like how you were abandoned or maybe ostracized, as you said, like from family and friends and from your community. Like they were traditional minded. And thank God you were alive. You did not think of ending your life. As you mentioned, like, I had a child, so I didn't have the guts to take away my life. I thought of my child, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's really, really nice. You're strong and now you're sharing all of that. So you are an example to all the other young mothers and fathers who may be facing a similar situation. We're not gender biased. It could be either of the spouses who could be facing this issue of being a single parent. Take care of your child. If you don't agree as a
Yes.
good couple, take care of your child. Yes, dear. So, ma'am, we now come to an end now to this session. We sum up the session and we have the third session with you very soon.
Thank you very much. I've really enjoyed sharing my journey and opening up. And I hope it's helping, obviously, the listeners, the viewers, to take some wisdom from my story, from my journey.
Yes, ma'am. Definitely, ma'am. We will, because you shared that so well. And you've written a book also, with regard to your life story. Now, ma'am, if anyone would love to lay their hands on this book that you've written, where could they buy it, online, offline, if you can just share that?
Yes. It's on Amazon, so you can find it on Amazon. If you put in either my name, Jaswinder Challi, or the title of the book, The Lighthouse, A Soul's Journey in Illuminating Darkness. I find that people have said that they find it easier under my name. So if you just put my name, Jaswinder Challi, in Amazon, you should see it come up, The Lighthouse. And I would love, yes, I would love for you to buy a copy of my book and maybe even leave me a review on what nuggets you took from it, how it helped you in your journey. I would love some feedback. It would be really interesting to know. I am writing my second book as well.
Wow, that's
It's
beautiful.
it's called The Authenticated Voice, and that's all about being true to, as I shared throughout this journey, how I had to remain authentic to myself.
Excellent, excellent. We look forward to the second book, and definitely we'll have a discussion on that as well. That's really nice. So, dear friends, do lay your hands on this beautiful book. We'll share the details in the description. You can collect this book or have one copy for yourself, or you could recommend it for a friend or a well-wisher who's undergoing through difficult times. Somebody who's undergoing through difficult times could read this book and challenge others and be a great single parent to your child or children. With this, we'd like to sign off. This is Andrea signing off now from the International Fab Talks. Please do share this video with the right kind of people. And if you like what we are doing, stay connected with us. Like, comment, subscribe, and share to the International Fab Talks. Prioritize peace, and of course, don't allow yourself to be taken for granted by anyone in the world. Whatever relationship you may be in, it could be with your spouse, your in-laws, your own child, of course, when they grow as adults. No one should take advantage of your good nature, nor you should take advantage of others. With this, we sign off. Stay blessed. Thank you, dear.